Hi, I'm Jim O'Toole. I'm a senior fellow here in the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics. Today, we're going to discuss issues of financial and accounting fraud. And to help us understand both the sort of causes of that and some things that we might be able to do to prevent such terrible occurrences, we have a really informed expert today in David Jolley. David is the managing partner for markets for Ernst Young in the Western region. And he has spent a tremendous amount of time investigating why it is that we get situations like we had at places like WorldCom and at Enron. So I'd like to start off just by sort of asking you, David, looking at these very high-profile cases of accounting and financial fraud, it seems that the people who committed these crimes were not the kinds of criminals you would expect to end up in jail. They seemed like relatively good people who got caught up in all of this. So why is it that good people will do bad things in these situations?
So Jim, I've always started with the supposition that people don't wake up in the morning saying, I'm going to go out and commit financial statement fraud. But I think once they get into a pressure situation, it takes three things for a fraud to occur. There has to be a pressure, there has to be an opportunity, and an incentive. And I think that when somebody that's well-intentioned gets in a situation where they're under tremendous pressure to perform financially or achieve a financial outcome, they feel that pressure. And sometimes there's a rationalization that occurs to say, if we don't quite make the numbers this quarter, but maybe release some reserves, we'll make it up next quarter. And then maybe that happens for 2 quarters. And the problem is, I think people that are in that situation find that maybe the business isn't performing, and 4 quarters down the road, they're still trying to rationalize. And then at some point, there's a realization that they've got a problem.
David, you mentioned these pressures. For example, what kinds of pressures are people in the financial part of the business under?
Right. Well, I think that certainly in today's environment, there's an enormous focus on short-term results. And in the analyst community, in the securities industry in the United States, analysts develop expectations of the results of public companies for every quarter. And there is a lot of pressure in those public companies to meet those analyst expectations. It's interesting that a lot of times the results of the company have less to do with the stock performance than the results compared to expectations. And if a company falls short of those expectations, it can be devastating for a stock, and it takes a long time for that stock to recover.
But listening to this, it sounds like these pressures are all just a part of the kind of shareholder capitalism that we have. Is there anything that the CFO can do that can relieve some of those pressures, particularly for his own people?
It's interesting because some companies have taken the position that they're not going to give guidance. And so, that subjects the analysts to developing their own expectations without any input from the company. So that could be a little bit dangerous. But some companies have said, look, we're not going to publish expectations or guidance, and so we're not going to be beholden to those expectations. And companies go into that, I think, very well intentioned. But the reality is, if the analysts start developing unrealistic expectations, the company says, well, geez, we've got to give them some guidance. And then they fall into that sort of that same pattern of then, committing to expectations and then having to meet those analyst estimates. And so, is there a solution to that? I think that it's developing a long-term view of things and saying, we recognize that there's going to be some volatility potentially in the short term. No business performs on a static upward northeast curve, and to say, we're going to take a long-term view of things, and if our shareholders are on board with that, this is a good investment.
So what can a CFO realistically and practically do internally to help create an ethical culture and to remove some of those pressures off his people?
Great question. I think from a leadership perspective, the CFO has to set the tone of doing the right thing, sort of regardless of how that may impact the stock price. Again, the financials are to reflect the underlying operations of the business. and it's not the other way around. And so a CFO, I think, is key in establishing that tone of doing the right thing, being smart about it, but doing the right thing. And you don't manage the numbers by managing the accounting. You manage the numbers by managing the underlying business, and then the accounting will follow the business results.
David, it sounds to me that a lot of the responsibility of the CFO is similar to the responsibilities of the CEO. How do they differ?
And I think that tone from the top really has to start at the C level. Now, that being said, we've got a lot of very notable CEOs, entrepreneurial CEOs that are known for their dynamic personalities, and they're pushing the envelope, and that's why they're so progressive. And so there sort of needs to be a bit of a balance there. And so while they can establish that tone, it really, I think, is incumbent on the CFO to say, what that means from a financial reporting perspective, and to drill that down into their group.
David, I know that you have studied WorldCom and Enron and several of the other scandals that occurred about a dozen years ago. Since then, we've had the Sarbanes-Oxley legislation. Do you feel that legislation has reduced the amount of fraud that's occurring? And I guess, are you kind of hopeful about the future? Are we moving in the right direction?
Well, I'm an optimistic person, but unfortunately, I don't think that Sarbanes-Oxley has cured all of the unethical ills out there. It's been said that desperate people will do desperate things, and I don't think we've cured that. So, well, I think that it's created a lot more awareness about some of those types of behaviors and activities. It certainly hasn't cured them, and so I think it still is incumbent on an organization, and particularly a leadership team, to establish that culture of high ethics, high integrity.
David, thank you very much for sharing your insights and your knowledge with us today. I learned a lot, so thank you, and to all of you out there, thanks for watching.